Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life track like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, I'm a World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
I want to thank you for another evening of issues today. It's Saturday, it's 6 o'clock. Wherever you might be in the UK, that's what time it is. But
I pay for my crime.
If you're somewhere else, then you're in a different time zone.
I already did my time.
1 p.m. EST.
I already did my time.
I think it's 10 a.m. PAC.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Well, welcome to World Jam Global Radio. My name is Kervin, Julien, and the program is Issues Today.
About the system, it was all about survival.
Just a quick reminder, you can catch me tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock GMT
Too young and foolish
for another Church Before Church. We do the Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel Show.
I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street.
But tonight,
money, life is so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been.
Tonight we're back here on Issues Today, and it's another wrongful conviction.
Gun in my hand. It ain't about being no.
And this one you're really gonna have to prick your ears up for.
In jail.
We're looking at the story of Christopher Charles Forbett, and we do have his, as a guest speaker on today's show, his wife Alicia Forbett.
I paid for my crime.
Stand by.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did.
I'll be keeping you up to date with all the shows that we've got lined up for future months. And I suppose let me just take this opportunity in welcoming our brand new producer, Candice Brewer.
Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime.
Who jumps on board with
I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track.
a real passion to get involved in this program and
citizen again. This is my message.
most importantly to serve God.
In statewide, worldwide, there was not a man I could.
I do believe that this is an appointment destined by God.
I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so.
And my prayer is, my hope is that together
been rearranged. I'm a change.
We're going to be able to bring some better stories, some better programs,
Gangster life is too short to spend it all.
and maybe be involved in some better results.
With this living hell, already did my time.
Don't forget, if you've got a story that you want us to share, you can follow us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
Already did my time.
You can get us on the Issues Today Facebook page.
Already did my time.
Follow us on Twitter at Issues Today Radio.
I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do.
Direct messages. Find me, Kervin, Julien.
Repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Not sure we, over 3 years ago, we started
Especially all you haters.
Issues today, and
Did my time.
here we are, still looking at wrongful convictions, unlawful killings,
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already
and
did.
various aspects of
Going on right now,
police corruption.
facing life in prison. Prison.
Wow.
Well, I'm sure you're going to enjoy. I'm not sure if the word enjoy is the right word.
Trying to cope with this living here.
But today's issue, Swung jury,
Yes, I am. 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 Trying to cope with this.
speaks about the conviction, the miscarriage of justice afforded to Christopher Charles Forbett,
Did my time. I paid for my crime.
who was convicted over 4 years after the crime was
Be thy name.
committed.
Kingdom come. Thy
And once again, we do not wish to
will is in heaven.
disrespect the life that was lost or the family members that are grieving.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who
But justice ain't served when an innocent man is convicted of a crime he didn't do.
temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. All those drive-by killings, stop them.
So, without no further ado, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you my guest today, speaking on behalf of Christopher Charles Forbett. It's his wife, Alicia Forbett. Good evening, good afternoon, Alicia.
Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
Well, we are good over here on this side of the pond, and it's been wet, cold, and windy out here in the UK. I'm not sure what kind of weather you've had out there in where you are, but no doubt you can tell us. If you kindly, for the purpose of our audience, introduce yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Alicia Forbett. I currently live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where it is cold and cloudy and quite windy. No rain yet, but I think tonight we will have.
Well, I sometimes we often hope that we get to meet people on better circumstances, but we obviously, I came across you in the wrongly convicted group, which means that you have a story for us to tell, and you are the wife of Christopher Charles Forbett, who was convicted of manslaughter in 2014, over 4 years after the crime was originally committed, and you've been championing for his release or appeal ever since. And do you want to first start off by telling us how long you've known Christopher for, how long you've been married, and what kind of a relationship you have?
Chris and I have been best friends for almost 8 years. We met at his grandfather's 80th birthday in July of 2010. Even though I lived in Dallas and he lived here in Tulsa, 5 hours apart, we talked almost every day, either by Facebook Messenger or on the phone or text message. We stayed in touch, talked all the time. He was convicted in 2014, and I made the decision shortly thereafter to tell him that I was in love with him, and had been for quite a while. And he let me know that he had felt the same way. And we were married in March of 2016 at the prison by our pastor, the pastor of the church that I went to at the time, and he actually did prison ministry also, and so he was sort of our mutual pastor. And so, of course, with it being at the prison, it was a small ceremony. Our relationship, our marriage is very focused on God. We put God first in everything.
Amen.
We pray together every day. We spend as much time in church as we can. We do our best to help others, whether they're in our same situation or just in different places in their lives. We feel like God has put it in our hearts to help others who are in our situation, who, are doing, whether wrongfully convicted or not, doing time in prison, because prison time, regardless of whether it's a wrongful conviction, is hard time, not just for the person that's on the inside, but for the family that's left out here.
Absolutely. And Christopher himself, what do we know about Christopher? What type of a guy is Christopher? I mean, what type of a guy was Christopher prior to this charge and arrest and conviction?
Chris is funny. He loves to make people laugh, and he loves to laugh. He has a 15-year-old sister. He was actually convicted on her birthday, her 12th birthday, and that devastated her. They were, even though they're 17 years apart, they were still very close. He has a 10-year-old daughter who was absolutely his world before all of this happened. He would spend hours and hours playing with her and doing pretty much whatever she wanted to do. She was a little girly, and of course, he would play dolls or cook with her or whatever it was that she wanted to do, anything to be able to spend time with her. He loved to spend time with his family, just cookouts and things like that. And he worked 2 jobs so that his ex-wife wouldn't have to work. His ex-wife at the time wouldn't have to work, so that she could stay home with the kids.
All in all, you're kind of regular guy, right?
Really just a regular guy, regular life, work, kids, home, church on Sundays. That was kind of life.
Was he working? Did he work? What sort of a career did he have? What was his occupation like?
He worked in a sheet metal shop.
Okay. Had he been working there for a long time?
I think he'd been at that particular job for about 1.5 years.
Okay. So, his family, his brothers and sisters, did he have good relationships with them?
His little sister, I'm actually leaving to go and pick her up after we're done here so that she can spend the rest of the weekend with me. They're very close. His younger brother was murdered, actually, around about the time that his trial started. And so he wasn't able to go to his funeral because he wasn't allowed to leave the state. So that really kind of tore him up. But his father has not ever really been a big part of his life since he was very young. And so really he had his mom and his sister, and had just recently developed a relationship with his brother over Facebook and Facebook Messenger and like that, and had just recently kind of gotten to grow close to him before Jordan was murdered. So Jordan was killed on campus at Kansas State University in November of 2013. So he missed out on having a relationship with his brother.
Oh, it's a real shame. And then if we kind of try and fast speed forward a little, on a night in 2010 was the beginning of how his whole world crumbled. So I gather from the conversations that we've been having, this particular day was his birthday, right?
No, it was actually a continuation of the party that we had for his grandfather.
Okay. So talk us through that. Tell us what happened.
That evening, I got off work around the time that I normally did, around 5:15, and called Chris on my way home. I did that pretty regularly. Kind of made traffic pass a little faster, made time pass a little faster, being stuck in city traffic. So I called, and he and his cousin Stacy and two homeless guys that he was friendly with were at the house, just hanging out and drinking. Chris never met a stranger. He was friendly with everyone. And so for him to be friendly with these guys that lived in the park down the street from his house was not unusual. And the guys that were there, he had hung out with several times. He had been friendly with for a long time, and it was kind of an unspoken agreement between them that, you know, they would provide the alcohol and he'd feed everybody. You know, he'd feed them and whoever was at his house. And so they were all at his house drinking and just enjoying each other's company. And Kenneth Barrett passed out like people do when they've had too much to drink. And like people tend to do when they've had too much to drink, Chris had poor judgment and decided he was going to pull a prank on Kenneth. And so he and his cousin Stacy shaved his head. I can't count the number of college parties I went to when I was in school that, you know, stuff like that happened.
Yeah.
But around 10:15 or so, we were still on the phone, or we were back on the phone. We'd hung up a couple of times and gotten back on the phone. And I reminded him that his girlfriend would be getting off work soon, and he'd probably better get the guys out of his house so that she wouldn't be upset.
So
so he laid the phone down.
You guys actually weren't an item at the time then?
Correct. We were just friends.
Okay.
He was still with his daughter's mother at that time. So he laid the phone down, and he was gone for just a minute. I heard one of the guys kind of cussing and fussing at him. And then they were gone. He's back on the phone. I mean, it was literally a minute and a half, maybe, that he was off the phone. And then he got back on the phone and was laughing because Kenneth Barrett was angry that they shaved his head. About 15 or 20 minutes later, his cousin Stacy, who was 17 at the time, told him he was going to walk down the street to the convenience store to get a drink, and he'd be back. Well, during the time that he was gone, Chris started getting kind of sleepy and falling asleep on the phone, so I told him I was just going to hang up and I'd talk to him in the morning. And the next morning, he calls and he asks me, who all was over here last night? I said, you weren't that drunk. You know who was there. And he said, it was just me and Stacy and Kenneth and that other guy, right? I said, yeah, that was it. Why? What's going on? Well, the police were there. When they got up the next morning, Kenneth Barrett was found in his backyard in his daughter's playhouse, and he was deceased.
Hold on, in whose backyard? In whose backyard?
In Chris's backyard.
Right.
And his pants were down, like he had been sexually assaulted. And the police came, questioned him, questioned his cousin, took x-rays, pictures of his hands. There was no bruising, no chipped bones, nothing to indicate that he had really beat on anyone. You know, if you hurt somebody bad enough to kill them, you're going to have bruises yourself. But there was nothing. They talked to the other homeless man that was there. The only information that the police got from him is that his nickname was Hillbilly and that he lived in the park. They didn't get his real name. They didn't get any other information from him, and he disappeared soon after. They've not been able to locate him since. It took them a year and a half to charge Chris with anything, and another 2.5 years to go to trial.
Wow. Go on.
When they charged him with manslaughter, he immediately, his ex-girlfriend by that point, called him and told him, "Hey, you have a warrant for your arrest for manslaughter. You need to figure out what this is all about." And so he got in touch with bail bondsman. Bail bondsman got in touch with the courts, found out what was going on, and he immediately turned himself into the bail bondsman so that he could go to the jail and get the warrant taken care of. He knew that he had absolutely nothing to hide, and the thought that anything could actually come of it was so far from his mind that he didn't even hesitate to turn himself in. You know, in his mind, I'm innocent. Let me just go and take care of this. And it's turned into almost 6 years after the warrant was issued. You know, here we are, fighting to get him out of prison for something that he didn't do.
Firstly, let me ask you this: when this warrant was when he found out that there was this warrant for him? Did this come out of the blue? Was he expecting?
No, it was out of the blue. He had not even talked to police in over a year. Police had not contacted him. There was absolutely no indication that this was going to go any further than him being questioned and that x-rays and pictures and all of that being taken. By that point, he assumed it's a year later. I've not heard anything. They must realize that I didn't do it.
Was it? Sorry, Alicia. At the beginning, when they first found the body and they first spoke to Christopher, was there ever a suggestion that he was a suspect?
No, they took him into the police department for questioning because the guy was found on his property. They also took his cousin Stacy, who was there, and his girlfriend at the time, took all three of them in for questioning. Chris gave all the information that he could give. We don't really know what was said by his girlfriend because her video testimony was lost. The original questioning and testimony and everything that she gave at the police department that first day was lost. So we really don't have any idea what was said or what ideas she could have given anyone.
In the only bit of outside media coverage that I could find in researching this, there was an article in the Tulsa Recorder or whatever it was called, it's a newspaper out your side, which only referred to the conviction and the manslaughter charge, and it also said that Christopher had admitted that he had punched in the ribs several times, a few times, 3 or 4 times, I think was what it quoted, in the rib area. There had been an altercation. Do you want to explain that to me? How?
Absolutely. What they're referring to is when he had asked the two homeless guys to leave his house, and Kenneth woke up and was angry because they'd shaved his head. He and Stacy both, his cousin Stacy, both hit the guy a few times. They both admitted to that. The original medical examiner's report was also lost. And the medical examiner that did that report had taken another job out of state, and the judge didn't feel it necessary to call them back to Oklahoma to testify. So the replacement coroner's report or replacement medical examiner's report is what they used in trial. The original medical examiner's report said that he died from crush syndrome, which isn't physically possible of course, to be caused by fists, and that his blood alcohol level was over the lethal limit. So he could have died from crush syndrome, or he could have died from alcohol poisoning. But that medical examiner report was never entered into evidence because it was lost.
And what was the outcome of the second coroner's report?
Actually, that coroner's report says that the cause of death is undetermined.
So, as far as the coroner's report is, both of them, neither one of the coroner's reports has even come close to suggesting that he could have possibly died for those blows that he had to his ribs.
Correct.
Okay. So that's the coroner's report. At the first time of them being arrested or being brought in for questioning, did they submit all that information immediately, both Stacey and Christopher, or was that something that was dragged out of them? Okay. So they had no qualms in saying, well, look, this guy was getting a bit boisterous, he wouldn't leave, and so he hit him a couple of times and pushed him through the door.
Correct. He admitted that before he even went to the police department. He told the police officers what happened standing in his front yard before they even took him to the police station. I mean, he knew he had nothing to hide. He knew that he wasn't responsible for the man's death, and so he gave the absolute truth from the very beginning.
Okay. And was any examination made of him in order to ascertain the ferocity of which he might have hit? You know, they could do all of that, can't they? You know, you must have hit him a lot harder than that because there's bruising to your knuckle kind of thing.
Right, they did do x-rays. They did take pictures of his knuckles, and they had nothing. None of that. They also did DNA on both him and Stacey, and none of that even made it to trial.
Wow. Is there any other evidence that was collected at the scene where his body was found that could possibly give an explanation as to A, how he got there, and B, why that's the point where he died?
There was nothing. The best that we can figure is this wasn't the first time that Kenneth Merritt had been at Chris's house. They were buddies. They drank together a lot. And the best that we can figure is after Chris ran them out of the house, something happened, and he came back to some place that he thought was safe. And that's how he ended up there.
So is there any evidence that can point to or suggest that he may have received the fatal injury away from there, or is it convincing, overwhelming that that's where the fatal injury was received?
There's no evidence either way. For one thing, the police didn't do any investigation outside of that yard and that household. They didn't look any further than that.
So is there any evidence to imply that that's where he met his death?
No.
So there's no way that... for me, I would ask a couple of questions. Could he have fallen down the stairs on his way out? Because they're talking about crushing. And I suppose if he was convicted of manslaughter, are they saying that the blows were what made him sort of like disorientated? Did he fall down the stairs? I'm assuming there's stairs. I'm just trying to paint a picture. Is that what? Go on.
There weren't any stairs, but actually, what the prosecution said and what they got him convicted on was that the man was beat to death. Now, if you beat someone to death with your fists, you have bruises. And the person that you beat to death has bruises. This man had no bruises. Chris had no bruises on his knuckles, no bruises on his hands. There was no bruising on either side.
So what was actually crushed? If in the first coroner's report they said it was a crushing syndrome, what in his body was crushed?
Some of his internal organs.
Okay, was there broken ribs, damaged ribs?
No broken ribs. There were old fractures that had already healed,
okay,
but no broken ribs.
No crushed chest or anything that could have caused the organs to malfunction?
No.
Was there an independent medical report done in order to try and ascertain how this injury could cause his death, or because for me, if you've got a crushing syndrome, and then the part of your body, the ribs needs to be broken. I mean, I've been involved in an altercation where I was done for attempted murder many years ago, and it was partly because I broke the ribs of an individual whose ribs then punctured his lungs, and almost killed him. So I can understand that, but if there's no broken bones or to the body, so to speak, how did the organs inside get crushed?
Well, it was more abdominal injuries,
Okay.
which, of course, your stomach, spleen, kidneys, liver. And you have to keep in mind that this man was homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And the homeless population here, I'm not sure about in the UK or in other states, but the homeless population here, the majority of the time has a drug problem.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you have hepatitis C, which can go undetected for years and years and years, and then you get hit in the liver, it can kill you. And so they didn't ever say whether he had hepatitis C. None of that stuff came out. None of that stuff was ever tested to find out if maybe he had hepatitis C and was bumped by a car, but the injuries that he had were more like he was hit by a car, or
something quite substantial, a very heavy blow.
Something, not somebody hitting him a few times and sending him out the door.
Yeah.
And he walked down the street. He walked down the street with his friend, the other homeless guy that was there. When he left, they were walking down the street arguing.
So they were after they left the house, they were seen away from the house.
Correct.
Okay. And was that seen by somebody else that made a statement to support that?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a neighbor several houses down.
Okay, so now tell me what that neighbor said. What was the content of the evidence that neighbor gave?
He was sitting on the front porch and saw the two guys walking down the street arguing.
Okay.
And that was literally his whole statement. No, I was on my front porch. They were walking down the street arguing with each other.
And then and obviously continued to go their way. Now, we also have your Stacy, who was the nephew, the cousin, who left the house shortly after they left. Okay, and what does he say in his statement?
At trial, he really got on the witness stand and blubbered and cried most of the time. We found out later that he was on drugs when he was on the witness stand, but his statement was identical to Chris's. They were all at the house. They were drinking. Chris realized that his girlfriend was going to be home. They woke Kenneth up, and Kenneth refused to leave because they'd shaved his head and he was angry. And so they both, threw a couple of punches, shoulders, chest area, and he left. And that was the end of it. And then he left to go to Quick Trip, the convenience store down the road, and came back 45 minutes or so later.
Let me ask.
Now
Go on, carry on.
Stacy has since bragged to several people, both inside the family and outside friends, that when he left the house to walk to the convenience store to get a drink that night, that he ran into Kenneth Barrett, and he's the one that beat him to death. He's bragged about this. We have sworn statements from 3 people that say that he said this.
Was this since the conviction or prior to the conviction?
It was after the conviction.
Okay. And at no time did anybody think, and I would imagine, based on what you've told me about Christopher, that he wouldn't have even entertained that as a thought at the time that he was going to trial, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
Wow.
Absolutely not. That was his little cousin, and Chris really kind of held the family together in a way. He's the one that kind of kept in touch with everyone, and he's realized now, since he's been in prison, how much of an influence he had on his family, because his cousins don't talk to each other. They've all kind of gone their separate ways since he's not there to kind of tie them all together. And he never would have thought that Stacy could do something like that.
Wow. Well, we talked about the various different twists and turns that they have in this particular story. Let's deal with the attorneys first, shall we?
Okay.
Because he wasn't properly represented. Or you suggest
not by any means.
He wasn't represented. So, tell me about how this story of the attorney develops. First of all, he hires a. Did he hire? Was it a court-appointed attorney, or did he hire an attorney at the beginning?
Oh no, they actually hired an attorney. I will probably catch some crap for this, but he hired the Worth law firm. James Worth was supposed to represent him. That's who he met with. That's who he dealt with from the very beginning. James Worth is obviously the owner, founder, senior partner of that law firm. And the day that he goes to trial, he gets to court, and it's a guy that he's only met on one occasion that's there to represent him. We find out after the trial that attorney had not ever been in a trial before in his life, not ever set foot inside a courtroom for a trial before. This was his very first one. And that prior to going to work for this law firm, he was a research specialist for the prosecution team that prosecuted Chris.
Surely that's surely that's a conflict, isn't it?
Well, you would think so, but he didn't let anyone know that until after the trial was over, and we were waiting on sentencing.
So now he's got this substitute attorney. How was this attorney's performance relevant to?
He really had the attitude of, this is a slam dunk case. We don't have anything to worry about. Chris asked him several times if he needed to speak to me or if he needed my phone records, since I was on the phone with him that night. He told him repeatedly, no, we don't need anything else. We have everything we need. When it came up that his ex-girlfriend, by that point, who was testifying against him, was friends with at least 2 of the jurors that we know for sure. We believe 3, but she blocked us before we could find out for sure. With at least 2 of the jurors on Facebook, instead of calling for a mistrial or demanding that those jurors be recused. He just went with it. Oh, no, they're just friends on Facebook. It's not a big deal.
So let's just get this right. Not long afterwards, the relationship with his ex-girlfriend went absolutely pear-shaped. We know this. But what was her position as far as his guilt or innocence prior to the relationship going pear-shaped?
Well, prior to them splitting up, and they split up because after that night he quit drinking. Period, end of story. He never wanted to drink again, and she refused to quit. And he knew that he couldn't be around that kind of lifestyle anymore, and so he left. She was dating off and on.
So how long after that night did he leave?
It was 6 months.
Okay. So there was still prior to the Kenneth Barrett dying, they were still together for 6 months, and now in that 6 month period, how was she as far as defending him against the possibility of him being involved in that crime was concerned?
During that time, she was as adamant as I am today that he was innocent.
And was she questioned by the police in that 6 month period?
She was questioned in the very beginning, and then she was questioned again closer to trial because they lost her original video statement.
And obviously now there's no way of being able to tell what changes were made from one statement to another.
Correct.
And so did you know his ex-girlfriend?
I did. We were very, very close, friendly, talked quite a bit.
So I take it that you and her spoke about this issue. Did she know that you was on the phone with him that night?
She did.
Okay.
She actually, when she came home, she called me and asked me if I'd talked to him that evening, and I told her yes. And she asked me how much he had to drink. I said, he and Stacy were drinking. I don't know how much he's had to drink, but he was fine when we hung up.
Right. So that was her demeanor. That was her attitude. That was her means of support for her partner at the time. When did you notice that her beliefs or her attitude or her demeanor changed as far as being supportive or unsupportive of Christopher was concerned?
Well, this is where it does get kind of nasty, because they had a daughter together, and Chris got married to someone else, and during the time between the time that he and his ex-girlfriend split up and the time that he got married, he had his daughter almost every weekend. She was at his house. She was over there after school. He could pick her up from school on Fridays and keep her until Monday morning. She was there all the time. They spent as much time together as possible. Even after he got married to his ex-wife, he got her at least every other weekend. Well, when her mother, his daughter's mother, found out that her daughter was calling his wife mom, she kind of lost it and decided then that she didn't want her going over there anymore, and took steps to have all of his visitation terminated due to these charges.
Wow. So almost a complete turnaround, transformation from one to another.
And it was all because of his relationship with his ex-wife.
Okay.
She was still very jealous and very. She wanted them to be together, and if they couldn't be together, she wanted him to be alone. And as long as he was alone, that was fine, and he could have his daughter and he could spend as much time with her as he wanted. But once he got with his ex-wife, all of that changed.
And all of this is prior to his conviction, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, how much of that information, how much of that scenario was researched, investigated, and included by Christopher's attorneys in defending him against an ex-partner who once supported him and absolutely refuted that he had anything to do with it, and then, because the relationship comes to an end, totally changes her stance on the issue and starts trying to find ways in convicting him. Would you say that she was that vindictive? And furthermore, why? That's one question. Was she that vindictive? Does she appear to be that vindictive? But secondly, and more importantly, why didn't the attorneys pursue the woman scorned angle to challenge her testimony?
Honestly, his attorney didn't challenge much of anything. If they had done any research at all, they would have found out that her mother, who she's very close to even to this day, had just won a $1.5 million settlement. And she was friends with at least 2 of the jurors on Facebook. If Chris was out of the way, then she had sole custody of their daughter and didn't have to worry about her being around him or around his ex-wife or around any of his family. She could pretend like he never existed. Now, it's 4 years later, and she has his daughter, my stepdaughter, going by her new husband's last name and refuses to let any of us see or talk to her. His daughter has a grandmother, an aunt that she was close to. I have pictures of them playing in the mud together when they were little. You know, she was close to all of us. And we're not allowed to see her or speak to her because she wants to pretend like Chris never existed. And I mean, she has his daughter using some other man's last name. You know, that's the type of person that she is. She told his daughter, and I didn't know this until 2 years ago. She told his daughter that the reason that he didn't come around anymore is because he had a new family and a new daughter, and he didn't want her anymore.
So she wasn't aware that her mother helped put her father in prison?
No, she wasn't even aware that her dad was in prison. Wow. She thought that he had moved off and had a whole other family and just didn't want her anymore.
So that's we can understand the ex-girlfriend's reasons or thinking. She was in a hellhole that she was in, and she had no intention of getting out of it. She's probably very jealous that Christopher had the discipline and ability to step out of that and change his choices and his lifestyle. And more importantly, she was obviously very much distraught at the fact that he could move on without her. But the attorney not being prepared to investigate the woman scorned angle must have left everybody confused.
Well, I mean, it certainly left us confused. She has $1.5 million at her disposal and is friends with at least 2 of the jurors. You know, common sense tells you that those 2 people that she's friends with does not need to be on the jury. I mean, common sense to anyone who's never set foot in a courtroom tells you that.
Was there a knowledge that she was friends with people on the jury while the trial was taking place?
Yes.
And why wasn't that challenged during the trial?
It was brought to the attention of the judge. The judge asked the people, the one person that we knew for sure that she was friends with, if it would sway her decision either way, and she said no, and he left it alone. he let her stay.
It's irrelevant. I mean, if they were friends, they would obviously take one side or another. Irrespective, there was a conflict, immediate conflict. It's a no-brainer. For me,
there were several conflicts from the very beginning, from his attorney who used to work for the prosecutor.
Let's go through those conflicts one by one, shall we? List them. Let's go through them. Here's your opportunity, Alicia. Let's list those conflicts and let's bring them out there.
The lost medical examiner's report that says that the man died from Crest syndrome or alcohol poisoning. Mm-hmm. The second medical examiner's report says that his cause of death was undetermined. Mm-hmm. His attorney that used to work for the prosecutor that was prosecuting him, mm-hmm. His girlfriend being friends with, or ex-girlfriend being friends with people on the jury. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much that was. So much that happened during the trial.
That just throws up a whole smokescreen, right? And then when you add to that, the change and shift in her position once the relationship, falls apart, you start questioning the whole scenario as to whether or not her evidence is even relevant.
Right, and how do we know? Because they lost. And the lead homicide detective admitted that he's the one that lost her original statement. So how can we compare the way that she was then to the way that she was in trial without that original statement?
How much of her statement do you feel went towards convicting Christopher?
I would say that is probably what convicted him.
And then when you add the fact that she was friends with people on the jury, that makes it even more convincing.
Absolutely. She, still to this day, is so filled with hate and anger for him that, I've visited with her. I've talked to her. We don't speak anymore now that Chris and I are married. But prior to our marriage, we did sit down and talk. And with her husband sitting right there next to her, she told me how much she still hated him and how angry she still was at him for walking away from the family that she thought that they had.
Let me share something with you, just to give you a little bit of an understanding, because I really get this, and I don't think people who are listening could actually contemplate part of what you're saying. I'm a former drug addict. I was a drug addict and alcoholic for over 36 years before I found the Lord and turned my life around. And the mother of my children, we were codependents. We used to use together very much like Christopher and his ex used to, for 16 years. And when we had our children taken away from us, I lost my house, lost business, life started to fall apart. And I made that definitive decision to make changes in my life, because enough was enough. And she wasn't quite ready to make those changes. So I went off first into rehab. Every time I had an opportunity to go into rehab, she would mess that up or offer me something else to not go, so that we would stay doing what we were doing. But whilst I was in rehab, and I had been in recovery for, I think it was about three or 4 months, I received a phone call for her that was to change our relationship forever. Prior to that, she had tried to entice me in coming out of the rehab and meeting her in a hotel where she was going to be armed with crack cocaine and alcohol for us to be able to party and have a good time, because I was in residential rehab. And I declined that. I didn't do it because I was hell-bent on going through my recovery successfully. But she was then later to call me, and her words still haunt me to this day. She said, "I was hoping that you would fail so that we can go back to the way we were." Now, that's the mother of children that have had the children taken away from her. We'd lost our home. We'd lost our business. Our whole life was falling apart. I'm in a battle for my recovery and my life. I'm in a battle to regain our children and get our children out of social care. And her only thought was for me to fail so that we can go back to how we were, which was crack cocaine, alcohol, and everything else. And the venom, the bitterness and resentfulness and the evil that came from her thereafter for many years to come, because I chose to walk away. No one could ever understand how much I had to force myself to stay away from that woman in order to make sure that I could save my soul. So I understand where Christopher's coming from, and I understand this hatred that you talk about from his ex, who feels that she's been left behind. My ex actually said I'd never given her the chance for her to do it straight with me. Well, I did twice, and twice she went straight out and bought more crack or called a dealer in, and we went back to doing what we were doing, and I weren't prepared to do it again. And I fought for 6 years, and I got all of my children out of care. I've turned my life around, and hey, 12 years later, she's still living the same lifestyle that I left her living 12 years ago. So I know what that journey is. I've been there myself, so I can fully understand just how bitter and resentful she could be. But what I can't understand is why the professionals who would deal with this type of behavior day in and day out for all the different types of cases that they would have gone through, and even if the attorney had never stepped into a courtroom before, in all of his years of training, in all of his reading up and learning and developing himself as an attorney, he would have learned to sift through that type of information to be able to challenge it appropriately. And I don't get why they didn't stand up for Christopher more.
And I don't know if it was fear of the people that he used to work with. You know, when you spend days and weeks and months in an office with someone, you get to know how they are. So I don't know if it was out of fear of those people, or if, you know, it was an election year, and I feel that maybe played a little bit of a part in his conviction, because the DA was running for re-election, the district attorney, and I feel like maybe he needed a quick conviction under his belt. Mm-hmm. That man, I've actually met him on two separate occasions by complete accident, and he is just as hateful outside of the courtroom as he is in the courtroom. So I don't know what the motives behind Chris's attorney not standing up for him were, other than out of fear or not having any idea what he was really doing.
Did Christopher himself never question what his attorneys were doing for him and why they weren't challenging or going in a particular direction?
Every time that he asked questions, every time that he brought up, when he brought up, she's friends with these jurors, he was pretty well shut down. His attorney would, no, we don't need that information. When it came to my phone records and me, me testifying, no, we don't need that information. You're going to be fine. You're innocent. You're going to be fine.
Was Christopher convinced that his attorney was right, or did he not think to himself, "Oh, hang on a minute"? Does he regret not being a bit more insistent?
Well, I mean, you have to understand, if you're 100% innocent and you know beyond any shadow of any doubt that you're innocent, and you're sitting in a courtroom, you have this cloud of disbelief over you, first of all, that all of this is happening to begin with, and second of all, that you could be convicted of something that you absolutely didn't do with absolutely no evidence.
And this is the big frightening thing, right? because again, we've just collectively hit the nail on the head. The biggest problem that people facing wrongful convictions have is the belief that within themselves that they know they didn't do it, so justice should prevail. But in a real world, that just doesn't happen. So the bottom line is it's trying to encourage people, trying to forewarn them that don't just settle for the knowledge that you know that you're innocent. You've got to actually fight every avenue. You've got to fight every line of attack. You've got to defend every allegation as if it were real.
Absolutely. But if you've not ever been in a situation like this before, Chris had not ever been in any real trouble. He'd been picked up for, I think, a public intox ticket or for traffic tickets. And I think that's really the only trouble he'd ever been in. And so whenever you have, when you're hit with something this large and, this life-changing, and you're sitting in a courtroom and it's your life that's on the line, but you know you're innocent, you don't think, I'm fixing to go to prison for 15 years. So you trust the person that you've paid to represent you. You trust that they have enough knowledge and enough information to make people see that you are innocent. You know you're innocent. Your attorney knows you're innocent. Most likely the prosecutor knows you're innocent. So what are we all even doing here? Is what it comes down to. Because you can't tell me that prosecutor didn't look at the exact same evidence that we're looking at and talking about today and say he's guilty.
Yeah.
Because me as an outsider looking in, you as an outsider across an ocean can look at all the evidence that you're being given and say, I really don't feel like he did this.
I mean, everything that we look at in correspondence to the scenarios as we can see it suggests that his cousin Stacy, who was obviously still intoxicated and maybe still having a bit of an adrenaline rush, having thumped Kenneth a couple of times, is the more likely. So my question is, if both of them had admitted to throwing a few punches to get him out of the door, why wasn't both of them on a manslaughter charge?
Well, and here's something else. Chris did not have any violent tendencies ever. He'd not ever been charged with a violent crime. He'd not ever been charged with domestic assault. He'd not ever been charged with any type of assault charge ever in his entire 24, 25 years. Ever. Stacy is 17 years old and has been arrested, kicked out of school, not just one school, but 3 different schools for attacking other students and teachers. He'd been arrested for attacking his grandfather. He was ran out of his grandfather's house for being mean to his bedridden grandmother. He had, I think the total was 18 juvenile assault charges. This is all before his 18th birthday. And since his 18th birthday, in the time between the actual incident where Kenneth Barrett died and the time that Chris went to trial, he was arrested 3 more times on domestic assault charges and has since been arrested twice more in Oklahoma, once in Florida, and once in Indiana on domestic assault charges. So he has an extensive record starting from about the age of 13 all the way to now of domestic assault, assault and battery on just anyone that he comes in contact with is in danger of him. And so I don't understand how they can look at these two people, Chris, who's not ever had a violent charge ever, no assault, battery, no nothing. The only thing he's ever had is a public intox ticket. And this person who has a long line of violent charges since he was 14 or 15 years old, and say, oh, we think we're going to go with the one that was drinking. We think we're going to go with the guy who has the public intox. Yeah, he seems like the most likely candidate. When both of them admitted to hitting this guy, and Stacy's the one with this long line of, assault charges.
Was this history of assault and battery charges dating back to when he was 13, was this known to the court during the trial at all? Was it ever raised or brought up?
It was known to both attorneys as well as to the judge. However, because all of it was juvenile charges, I'm not sure about in the UK, but in the United States, they're not able to bring up juvenile charges unless that person is actually on trial. And because he wasn't on trial, they couldn't bring up any of his juvenile charges.
Okay, no, the same goes here in the UK. You can't bring your juvenile charges up into a case unless the person's on trial. And in fact, in the UK, it's even worse. When you're on trial, you can't use your juvenile charges unless they're relevant to what you're currently being charged for. So, only on sentencing can that information be used, but not during a trial. So, at what point did the police lose interest or show they had no interest in Stacy as a possible suspect, having interviewed both parties that next morning, I imagine, and getting the testimony that they had both been involved in hitting and pushing Kenneth out of the house? At what point did they lose interest in seeing Stacy as a possible suspect, do you think, in your opinion?
I don't think that they ever really had any interest in Stacy as a suspect. And as horrible as this is going to sound, I've got to say it anyway, because this is what I believe, and I'm not the only person who said this. My husband is Native American, and here, especially in Oklahoma, Native Americans are known for drinking, for being drunks, alcoholics, that sort of lifestyle. And we feel like because of his race and because he was the adult in the house and it was his home, that they focused on him rather than on Stacy, who was a minor. Regardless of both of their criminal history.
Yeah, is Stacy not Native American then?
He is, but you can't tell.
Right.
He's part white also.
So, additionally, on top of that, right, the fact that Stacy was a minor meant that he would he have been going to juvie court then?
Well, no, because he was 17.
Okay.
So he would have been tried as an adult had they looked at him as a suspect and seen everything for the truth instead of focusing only on one person. Now, Stacy is, I can tell you a little bit more about Stacy. Stacy is an evil, evil person. And he's actually being looked for now by the police, both in Tulsa County and Creek County, because his nephew, his sister's oldest son, came forward and admitted that the reason that he ran away from home when he was younger was because Stacy had raped him several times. So this is the kind of person that Stacy is. He doesn't care. He doesn't care who he hurts. I found out just recently, within the last 6 months, that he threatened their grandfather. Chris had contacted their grandfather several times to come in and speak to his attorney about Stacy, because by this point he's kind of feeling like Stacy had something to do with it. And so he contacted his grandfather several times to come in and talk to his attorney, and his grandfather never would. I found out about 6 months ago that was because Stacy threatened him and told him that he would kill him and then burn his house down with him in it. And he believed him.
Okay. So at that point, so the grandfather doesn't come. Was there any other avenue that could have been taken in order to try and pursue the angle in getting towards Stacy? Do you think?
In reality, they could have subpoenaed his grandfather to come in and testify in court. I feel like that's really what they should have done in order to get Stacy's juvenile record out there at least a little, because they couldn't just read from the courts. It would have had to come from a person that was actually there. And given that he did hit his grandfather several times and was accused of, actually convicted of battery on his grandfather could have brought that up and got a little bit of his juvenile record out there.
I mean, it's a real crying shame, really, that no real attempt was made in order to get Stacy more answerable for the timeline. This is what I don't get. If both Stacy and Christopher were saying that Kenneth was okay when he left the house, having been punched a few times and let go, right? And the neighbor says that they were walking. Him and his mate was walking down the road, arguing amongst themselves, and then Stacy then testifies to the fact that he left the house to go to get more drink or something, or whatever it was he left the house for about 45 minutes. What I don't understand is what was Stacy's testimony as to what he did during the 45 minutes that he'd left the house before he returned.
He walked to Quick Trip, the convenience store, got a drink, ran into a couple of friends, hung out there at Quick Trip for a little bit, talking to them, and then walked back. So
were the friends ever found, questioned, asked to corroborate his end of the story?
No, and there were no. There are video cameras at Quick Trip that could have corroborated this, but they never pulled the video either.
I'm beginning to see a clear picture develop here, and I'm hoping that you're going to be able to use the information that we pull from this video, this recording, in order to be able to persuade somebody to take this case on and go for another appeal. Because when you talk about because I was very interested in the coroner's report of crush syndrome, because crush syndrome to me suggests a very violent, angry, and aggressive assault. To me, it speaks of somebody jumping on somebody with their feet, jumping on their bodies, not just, a real heavy assault, an abusive assault, angry, aggressive, abusive assault. It doesn't speak of somebody that you've had as a guest in your home, giving food and drink to, who's just a little bit troubled that he's had his head shaved and you want him to leave now and he ain't going to leave because he's a bit to drink, and you've shoved him down the door, and a neighbour has seen him leave of his own volition and he's walking. He doesn't seem to be in much distress or pain, and then he's later found dead. Was there a time given to his death that could pinpoint roughly how long after he was supposed to have left Christopher's apartment to the time that he was found, as opposed to at what point he died?
Well, I know beyond any doubt that he left between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. His time of death was in the very early morning hours, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. At that time, I know beyond any doubt that Chris was asleep, because he fell asleep on the phone with me, and then when his girlfriend got home, she called, and he was still asleep, and she was having a hard time waking him up. So I know beyond any doubt that he was asleep between the time that I hung up the phone with him, between 11:15 and 2 o'clock, that he was asleep. The coroner's report's time of death is between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. So
that's way after he left Christopher's apartments.
Several hours after he left Chris's house. And, if you beat someone so bad that it kills them, they're not up walking around the city, arguing with their buddy walking down the street after you beat them this badly.
This sounds, it really speaks of a much later attack. An additional attack, as opposed to the one that took place on the doorstep of Christopher's house.
And then the fact that the police never bothered to get the other homeless guy who was there that night, never bothered to get any of his information. They don't know his first and last name. They don't know where he's from. They don't have any information on him at all, other than what everyone called him, other than his street name. And they questioned him one time. When they came back to question him again, they've never been able to locate him again.
Okay, so where was Stacy supposed to be? What's his testimony as to where he was around the 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. time of that morning?
He says that he got back to the house around 1:30 after his walk to Quick Trip and back. We're not sure that that's what time he got back, because there was no one there to really, Chris was asleep. I wasn't on the phone anymore. So there's no one there that can really say he did get back at this time or he didn't. And then he says that he went to sleep. Now, we do know that he was there and asleep on the sofa the next morning when everyone got up and Kenneth Barrett was found. We do know that he was there and asleep on the sofa. But what happened between, say, midnight when he left and 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we really do not know.
And the police have never tried to investigate this time frame, because at the end of the day, you've got two potential suspects, both admitting to hitting and shoving him. One has a violent past, the other one doesn't. One has alibis to say that A, he was asleep, and B, he was on the phone for a long while. The other one doesn't. The other one gives reference to bumping into people and going somewhere else, and they don't pursue it. There is a whole plethora of information here available for you to be able to start looking at some kind of recourse for appeal. Now, what I can't figure out is why these lines of investigations were never pursued in the get-go, and why his attorney didn't pursue an angle as to even if wasn't to, because Christopher's sitting in a dock. Stacy's his cousin. The two of them are the only two that they have evidence of that have actually laid hands on this individual. But I just don't think enough has been done to eliminate Stacy as a possible suspect, even jointly, let alone individually and separately. as to how Christopher could be the only one who was sat in the dock, charged with the crime. I just don't see how we got there. Right? Having got there,
and that's what's so frustrating is it feels like the police were so fixated on this big bad drunk Indian guy that they chose that they couldn't see past that. They couldn't look outside of, we've got this guy, this is who we want, so we're going to make this work.
But that's no different. That type of mentality, that type of attitude is no different to the racist police who have pursued blacks in Chicago and New York and places like that with wrongful convictions or wrongful arrests or even wrongful killings, unlawful killings to boot. That mentality is no different. Racism is racism, no matter how it rears its ugly head. And if they're looking at him as opposed to as for his race, as opposed to the person that he is, then that's wrong too, right? And why didn't the attorney look at the angle in which the police were pursuing their client?
I think for a lot of people, that have not ever experienced that kind of thing. I think for a lot of people have not ever experienced racism or never had a loved one that experienced it. They kind of bury their head in the sand and believe it doesn't exist. And for his attorney, I'm sure that was pretty easy. No, you're not black, so it's not them being racist. So I don't think that people realize that as a Native American, there are a lot of stigmas attached to that race as well.
Oh, we know about those stigmas right over here on this side of the pond. Believe me.
I know that here in Tulsa, just in the past 2 years, there have been a couple of separate police shootings of different races, and the officer that was involved either was never charged or was acquitted. So I know that racism in our police force here is rampant, and not just in our police force, but in several areas of law enforcement. In our criminal justice system period. So I can see how it would happen, and I can also see how his attorney would be able to turn a blind eye to that and say, oh no, that's not what's going on here. But as an outsider looking at his case, or as someone that wasn't directly involved with his case, I can see it. Other people who were not directly involved with his case can see it. I just feel like part of the reason why his attorney didn't pursue that angle was because he didn't feel like that was really what was going on.
That's it's frighteningly scary. That potentially there is an absolutely vulgar, vile, and violent individual parading the streets with blood on his hands, or at least the death of one man on his hands, and potentially others that we might not even know about. Again, I'm only suggesting, but definitely the perpetrator of many victims of violence, who's walking the streets with a license to continue believing that they're invincible and they can get away with it. You said that Christopher's family connections were pretty good and pretty tight. Have there been any other family members that have spoken out or spoken up and said, well, hey, hang on a minute, I think Stacy's a more likely suspect?
Stacy's own sister actually signed a sworn affidavit that Stacy bragged to her about killing this man. She signed it in front of a Tulsa County deputy. He bragged to her, told her, "I've already killed one man and gotten away with it. What makes you think I can't do the same thing to you?"
So he was vile to even his own family members.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He's been in jail at least twice for beating up his own sister.
Do you know, I never believed for 1 minute that I was going to be as shocked about this story as I am. And I'm not sure why not, because I've done show after show after show after show for over 3 years now. And I never fail to get surprised as to the depth of evidence that suggests a wrongfully convicted person is innocent. But or even how far people go to convict innocent people. What always strikes me as odd is when there is a more likely suspect, and there is no pursuit of that individual in the pursuit of justice and the closure, because irrespective of everything else, Kenneth Barrett was somebody's son, somebody's family member, somebody's friend, somebody's relative, and that family deserves justice, don't they?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, you know, he was my husband's friend. He wasn't just some random homeless guy that he let in his house. He spent time with this man. You know, every single week he spent time with him. He would take his daughter down to the park to play in the splash park, and he would sit on the picnic tables and talk to this man. They had lengthy conversations. It wasn't just some random person. He was someone that my husband was friends with.
I had this thought quite early on as we were talking, and I didn't voice it, but I'm going to voice it now because it's just cropped into my head again. Do you feel it would have been less likely that Christopher would not have put his hands on Kenneth had Stacy not been there in the first place?
I really think that the entire situation probably wouldn't have happened had Stacy not been there. I feel like the whole shaving his head thing was very juvenile and probably something that Stacy came up with. And I feel like if it had been just Chris and Kenneth and even the other homeless guy there, I feel like there would have been
a totally different outcome.
At least some level of maturity there. When it came to, okay, it's time for you to go. I think that instead of hitting and pushing, there would have probably been words used. And I can't, I wasn't there. I can't say who threw the first punch. I can't say that punching or hitting or pushing or anything was even warranted. Because in my world, I don't deal with violence. We deal with words.
Yeah.
But for the Chris that I know, the person that I've been best friends with for almost 8 years, doesn't have it in him to really hurt someone like that.
But
especially not a friend.
But somebody would say that he must have had something in him because he hit him. I suppose what I'm suggesting now is that had Stacy not been there, and him being a protective cousin, and obviously alcohol played a big role in that. But I'd imagine that the immaturity of Stacy is probably what provoked the situation even more. But let's go down to the issues that probably led to Kenneth's anger in the first place. What do you know about his head being shaven, for example? Do we know who started it, who did it, who was responsible for it? Has Christopher ever spoken about it?
He has. I know that Kenneth was the first one to pass out, and so they kind of took it to the college kind of party level. The first person that passed out gets penises drawn on them and gets their head shaved. And, you know, that's sort of where it went. I'm not sure who thought that it was a good idea. I'm not sure who started it. I don't even think that they really know whose idea it was.
It was just a conversation between drunk people.
Exactly. It was, hey, we ought to shave his head. Hey, yeah, we ought to do that. And then the clippers come out, and, you know, there it is.
Yeah. I've been a victim and party to several pranks like that in drugged, alcoholic, crazed days where things were done quite stupidly. And yes, the victim would often be angry when they woke up and annoyed that these things were done to them, even if they agreed that they would be involved in it if it happened to someone else. You're just hoping that it's not you. You know, and I kind of get that childish, immature pranks that drunk people will have. But it was definitely not a reason for death, anyone's death. And so therefore, for me, there has to be something else that's provoking the additional thing. And it may well be Christopher and Stacey has hit this guy a couple of times, and he's gone out, and more importantly, maybe, you know, Kenneth sees Stacey when Stacey is on his way out or on his way back, and says, "What was that all about?" And, you know, and they get into it again.
Well, and there is another family member that Stacey's threatened that has kind of given us an idea about what actually did happen. When Stacey left to go to the store, he, of course, was going the same direction that Kenneth and the other guy were going, and ran into them. And the guy called him a few derogatory names, referring to his sexual orientation. And that's what started his end, you know, that altercation that ultimately resulted in Kenneth's death.
Sorry, Kenneth called him a few names.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Stacey's homosexual, and when they found Kenneth, although they didn't check, they didn't do any rape kit or anything like that to find out if he had been involved in a sexual attack. His pants were down when they found him. So, of course, because they didn't check any of that, they didn't check to find out if there was that sort of attack, we will probably not ever know if that's the truth or not. But what Stacey bragged about was that he called him a few names, and it made him angry enough to jump on him. And, of course, that's what the police here call hearsay, and so can't really be used in trial or in defense of Chris, but it has a ring of truth to it because of Stacey's violent nature and because how angry he's always been whenever someone calls him a name like that. It does have a ring of truth to it.
And here we were, if you remember, a while ago, as we were talking about the crushing syndrome, referring to it as a violent, aggressive, angry assault. You know, for the organs to be crushed to the extreme and extent where somebody loses their life, it sounds a lot more than just a few punches being thrown. Somebody leaving the premises and later dying as a result of that attack or assault and wounds. And the picture that you've just painted and presented of the other cousin's version of events that possibly, potentially could have happened paints a better picture to the reality of why there would be such anger and aggression in an assault or an attack that would crush somebody. Because my thoughts when you mentioned like him, because even if Kenneth had been hit by a car, he would have been bruised. You don't just get hit by a car, and unless it's a very high car, you get hit in your stomach. It's your thigh, your knee, that kind of area. But for those organs to have been crushed, to me, it speaks of somebody really sticking the boot in. That was the impression that I had. Somebody sticking the boot in, standing on your, kicking you in your belly and stamping on you while you're on the ground. Really angrily and aggressively giving you what for. Now, when you add to that the pants being pulled down, because I didn't get that earlier. I remembered you saying it, but it was of no real relevance to me. But that's a real sexual representation. That's a statement, and that statement is almost angrily, how dare you have some of this, and the possibility of drawing any forensic evidence to suggest that that's what took place is now so far gone that we will never be able to prove or disprove it. But collectively putting that information together paints a whole different picture as to how Kenneth Barrett met his death on that fateful night. For me, was the cousin's information made known to the attorney prior to the conviction?
No.
So this is new information.
Correct. He didn't actually come out as, of course we all knew. You can tell by being around someone long enough for the most part, but he didn't come out with it publicly until about 2 years ago.
Okay. And the sister's sworn affidavit, was that before or after the conviction?
After.
So that's new evidence. I'm not sure how your appeal process works out in the States, but here in the UK we can't go for an appeal unless there is new evidence, anything that wasn't available at the time of the conviction. You have several areas for new lines of investigation that don't necessarily need the forensic DNA that's necessary to prove that there was a sexual assault on him as well, because all the evidence points to a very aggressive, violent and angry attack that corresponds with all of this information that we're now presenting here today, that suggests that Kenneth Barrett met his death in a very violent and angry confrontation, as opposed to asking somebody to leave, having been in their company regularly prior to this occasion, but on this time you're a bit of a nuisance, and you won't leave, and they're just trying to get rid of you, and you need to go now, it's time for you to go now, but there's also evidential information that supports that you were seen leaving the property by a neighbor in the direction of the liquor store or whatever. There is sufficient evidence for you to start finding a new line of inquiry to support an appeal process for Christopher. Do you not believe so?
I do believe so.
So what's the stumbling block in pursuing the appeal?
Well, here in the United States, your first appeal gets attention from a public defender. We did use a public defender for the first appeal. It was denied November 6th of 2015. And anything after the initial appeal, you're kind of on your own with an attorney. I've found one attorney that has worked with us to draw up post-conviction relief. But most attorneys want between $15,000 and $30,000 for post-conviction relief. And as essentially a single woman, because even though we are married, I am solely responsible for all of our bills. You know, we have rent and car payment, utilities, and so coming up with between $15,000 and $30,000 without selling one of my own vital organs is next to impossible.
And you can't sell your heart because he needs that.
So, you know, here in the United States, once a person is wrongfully convicted, once a person is convicted, period, it's hard to get help. But on a wrongful conviction, you sort of feel hopeless, because most of us who are in this situation are middle class, sometimes upper middle class, and we don't make a whole lot of money. And, you know, we live paycheck to paycheck. You know, my mother's on a fixed income. His mother lives paycheck to paycheck. So even pulling together all of our resources, we could not come up with between $15,000 and $30,000 to pay an attorney, no matter how innocent he is.
So what you're really trying to say is that you ain't no OJ.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. So what is your plan going forward in order to try and get some focus, some attention on Christopher's case? Get some people to revisit, to look at it, to reinvestigate it. Do you have a plan?
We do have an excellent attorney who has been working with us for free, fortunately. He has drawn up the post-conviction relief and has it ready to be filed right this second. We are waiting for Stacy to be arrested on the charges that he has pending, and kind of see where that's going to go before he files post-conviction relief, because he doesn't want the district attorney and the state attorney general to say, okay, well, he's already got post-conviction relief filed. We don't need to worry about him. Let's focus on this. So he kind of wants to force them to say, okay, we know that this is the guy that really committed this crime. So because post-conviction relief, there's several ways that could go. And our ultimate goal is to get him out without having a felony on his record at the end of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't want him just released. You want him actually exonerated.
Right. I mean, it's hard to find a job in Oklahoma as it is, but to find a job in Oklahoma with a felony on your record is near impossible. And so our ultimate goal is for him to be released and to have all of that wiped away. Now, I mean, Oklahoma is one of only 4 states that has a cap on the amount of money that a person who's been wrongfully convicted can sue for. That's how many wrongful convictions come out of Oklahoma. They've put a cap at $150,000 because if they paid out more than that to every person who's been released
they'd be broke
on a wrongful conviction, this state would be broke.
Absolutely. And they deserve to be on that kind of statistic. So talk to me, we've got about 10 minutes left of the show, and I want to talk about how Christopher has coped since he's been incarcerated. How did he take the verdict when it first came, for example?
At first, it was really hard. I think it was really hard on all of us, but he kind of gave up. 15 years is a long time when you have a 6-year-old daughter. She's going to be grown by the time he gets out if nothing comes through for him. And so I think he really kind of gave up hope, and he was really angry and really just developed a hatred for anyone that he came in contact with because of all this. When your entire life and your family, your daughter, your mom, your little sister, your best friend, when everything is ripped away from you and you're stuck in an 8x8 cell with a heroin addict or a meth addict, and that's not something that you've ever really been around, then, you kind of develop a lot of anger and animosity toward everyone. He spent probably the first 6 or 8 months, 9 months, very angry and full of hate. But he was still going to church every night and was trying to stay focused on God and doing his best to try to do the right things. He got involved with a program in the prison 2 years ago this month, I think. It's called the Faith and Character Program. It teaches Celebrate Recovery, which is a 12-step program here. It teaches life connections. It teaches parenting classes, and people from the outside, the pastor that married us actually teaches some of the classes in that program. So he got involved with that. The program's a year long, and by about the 3rd or 4th month in that program, his entire attitude had changed, and he was getting on to me for not being in church. He was getting on to me for not reading my Bible, because I had a lot of anger too. Yeah. This is my best friend, and I know that he doesn't deserve to be there. So, by the end of the program last year, he had done a complete 180. His entire outlook on everything had changed. He is a facilitator for the program this year, which means that he actually teaches classes and mentors some of the guys that are in the program this year. He's running a workout program for some of the guys who have been addicted to drugs and are doing their best to stay off of them. And that kind of gives them something to focus on and look forward to each day. Why they look forward to working out with that man, I don't know. But it gives them something to focus on and look forward to, and helps them to stay clean. His door is always open to pray with them or to talk to them and help them through whatever problems they have going on. And he knows that God put him there for a reason. He feels like maybe the reason was to open his eyes and see how much he could help other people. And that's what he does. He does his best to help everyone else out.
At what point in all of this did you tell him that your feelings for him had changed from best friend to wannabe lover?
Exactly 3 years ago this month.
And tell me how did that come about?
I finally got his address from Stacy's sister, and I was at work when I got it, and I sat down and wrote him a letter. And it was basically, I missed you. I miss being able to talk to you. I don't have anybody to talk to out here. We were best friends. We talked about everything. When I found out my now ex-husband was cheating on me, that's who I went to. When he thought his ex-wife was cheating on him, I'm who he talked to. We talked about everything. And, so I sent him a letter, and it was, I miss you. I miss being able to talk to you all the time. And then at the very, very end, I put, oh yeah, P.S. I love you with everything in me, and sent it. I was like, well, he's going to take it how he will. Let's see how this works out.
But is that what you meant when you put that at the bottom of the letter? Did you mean to let him know that your feelings for him had changed?
I did.
Okay, that
did.
was pretty deliberate, right?
It was. I was scared what his reaction would be, but it obviously worked out for the best.
Okay, so, and what was his response? How did he respond to that letter?
I got a phone call maybe a week later, and he asked me, "Did you mean everything you said in the letter?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Even that last part?" I said, "Yes." He said, I love you too." Wow. I said, "Wait, you do realize that I meant that, like, really love you, right?" He said, "Yeah. How long have you felt that way?" I said, "I don't know, maybe a few years." He said, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Well, why didn't you?
Oh, you could have avoided all of this. All of this could have been avoided.
Exactly.
Right? Instead of spending all of this time in jail, you guys could have been happily ever after, living some other way. It's an amazing love story, to say the least. But it's a really unfortunate way to have to disclose how you felt about each other in a very unfortunate manner. How do you see your relationship developing going forward?
Well, we both really have a heart for ministry, and we both love music. He plays guitar and bass. I play the drums. We both write lyrics. I write Christian music, and so we would really like, once he's home, to be able to get into ministry, helping other people, because I know how hard life is as the wife of an inmate. Yeah. I know the struggles that we go through. I know the financial, I know the emotional, I know all of those things because I live it every single day. Mm-hmm. And he knows the struggles that those guys in there go through. He knows the struggles of alcoholism. He knows the struggles of addiction. He sees it every day. He knows how hard it is to maintain a good, healthy relationship with your girlfriend or wife while you have guys in the background telling you, as soon as she hangs up the phone with you, she's going to go off with her boyfriend. Mm. It's hard to maintain a healthy relationship when you're in that environment. And so we both have a heart to help people who have been in our situation or who are in our situation. We both feel like we have a lot to offer to that type of ministry and to leading people who are living a lifestyle like that closer to God.
Well, I just feel it's been an honor and a privilege sharing this past 2 hours with you here on World Jam Global Radio and the Issues Today program. And I feel even more honored and privileged that you shared yours and Christopher's story with us here, and chose to share it with us here. My prayer is that you will be able to use the information that you have, as well as what we've collectively put together through this recording, in order to find a way to pursue a way out for Christopher, a way out that frees him, not just from the conviction, but from the charge, that he can have that felony removed from his CV, his life CV, and that you guys could go on and live a more productive and prosperous life. My hope and my prayer is that somebody will hear your cry. We serve a God that hears every prayer, and is interested in every single intricate details of our lives. And I believe that God is a just God, is a fair God, and hears every prayer. So I pray that through the cry of his children, that he will put someone in your path that will enable you to accomplish the goal set before you, which is to see Christopher come home free of all charges and for you guys to start a more productive life again. That's my prayer for you tonight. And I pray that you will see that very soon. So I just want to take this opportunity in thanking you for sharing that story with us. I hope that our listeners who are listening will share and feel your pain and welcome your joy and continue to follow this story through the groups that we are affiliated with, the Wrongful Conviction Group Network, etc. And I pray that somebody will respond to Christopher's plight, and that an appeal will be granted where this new evidence can be presented, and truth and justice can prevail. Alicia, you're a very brave woman, and you're a very strong woman, and I believe that God has called you for a time such as this, and you need to be the voice that Christopher keeps hearing, and you need to keep beating on that drum until he's free in his home.
Thank you so much.
At this point, we're going to call it a day, unless there's anything else that you want to add that you feel that you haven't added yet.
Nothing that I can think of. Thank you so much for listening and allowing me the opportunity to share our lives.
Well, I thank you once again, Alicia, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of this recording very shortly after the show's finished.
Thank you very much.
So God, for now, God bless, Godspeed, God's grace, God's mercy, and take care. We're out of here.
Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Oh, I don't know about you. That's left me absolutely speechless.
I already did my time.
You can stay in touch with the things that are going on with Christopher Charles Forbit through World Jam Global Radio and Issues Today. We'll keep you posted and updated on his progress.
My crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Next week, my guest is Celeste.
Already did my time. I paid for my
And we really look forward to speaking with her as she brings forth a whole catalogue of cases that she supports, of people that have been exonerated having spent a long time in prison.
I was a drug dealer.
People that have been exactly where
But I never got how my own.
Christopher Charles Forbit is right now.
That's why I'm telling my story to you.
Some who spent 20 years or half their lives
All kind of stupid shit.
in prison for crimes that they didn't commit.
I've gotten older. The life I used to live.
I hope to encourage you
I was young and dumb. My brain.
with another story next week on World Jam Global Radio's Issues Today. But for now,
Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real.
I'm out of here. Don't forget you can join me tomorrow morning on the Wake Up Everybody Sunday Gospel Show, where I'll be doing Church Before Church.
All you haters.
New tracks,
The opening statements are going on right now.
new word of encouragement,
Live.
some absolutely great gospel music, and the presence of God. Just want to take this opportunity to thank you wherever you are, wherever you've been, whoever you are, for joining me here on World Jam Global Radio's Issues Today,
Did my time.
where we've been doing the story of Christopher Charles Forbit. Thanking Alicia Forbit once again for a frank and honest and open contribution to this particular troubling case. We're out of here.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can.
Do you like music like